Hello, everybody. Hey, everybody, what's going on? This is Theodore shouting out from the rocks. So, hey, y'all, it's just Sunday, July 5th, 12:40 a.m. I want to do another. Earlier today, we had a beautiful video on talking a little bit about haunted stories, haunted ghost stories. That was really, really cool. So I really enjoyed that. Had a lot of fun with that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm gonna open up Discord. There we go. And then let the girls know, got girls and guys know that I'm on. I can't hear. Hello, everyone. Let everyone know that I'm actually on. I'm on YouTube. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try to get it. Oh, everybody, hopefully you saw a live video, the live intro. I told you I'm trying. Definitely. I do intend on making this little channel, making it as cool as I possibly can. Really making it really cool. I'm gonna send an invite to Discord here. Invite so that folks can come on the stage. Whoever's up, usually Billiquis is up. You know what listen, last time, earlier today, I didn't think anybody would show up. To be quite frank with you, I didn't. My God, we end up having one of the best podcasts in a long time, which is really, really good. So the podcast that we had, we just talked about ghost stories that I've had, ghost stories that were from Sweet Lord, ghost stories from, because my grandmother, they're spiritual healers themselves, spiritual healers, they're hoodoo practitioners as well as mediums, psychics. Um, some in between them they have, because my grandfather's 94, my grandmother's 83. So between them, they have a lot of experience. They've both been practicing for 60 years, pretty much. So I think my grandfather's 65, my grandmother's 60 years, definitely. And the really great thing about it is learning from learning from the elders, my grandmother, grandfather. I tell people all the time, I come from a space. I gotta get those creepies done. I'm probably gonna do that while I talk to y'all. I come from a space that is so privileged, and I know that. I know that. There's so many people that want to learn as much as about conjure, about hoodoo, about root work, the good and bad of it. Not bad. Left hand, right hand. Sidebar. I put a pin in that. I say that you can't go into what we do as Black people thinking good or bad. Those type of terms doesn't work in nature. Too much of what we do derives around nature. And you're going to have some people, take it from me, as I'm a Belu. Belu, Beaulaieu. That surname is a byword in Louisiana conjure and root work. It has been so for the last 500 years. Long before the Louisiana state purchase. Right around the time, probably 100 years before the Spanish fought for Louisiana, and 200 years before the French fought for Louisiana to claim it as a French colony. So we know a little bit about conjure and about root work and what it takes And we also know that, and I've been taught this, especially about my grandfather, there's no good or bad in anything. There's only intention. And so, because when my grandparents first got a hold of me, they had to go. Here's the whole story. They had to go to court to get me because I was living with my mother for some time, and that wasn't working out because of abuse and things like that. So my grandparents, as I think back then they were in their 50s or 60s, 70, 80, yeah, 60s, because it's been over 30 years, nearly 40 actually. And they, after raising their children, their father, my father being one of their children, my father didn't. It's 4th of July, y'all. It's 12:46. They're still playing fireworks, and the cops ain't doing shit about it. After being my grandfather didn't want me to be a part of the system. He didn't want his grandson to be part of the child welfare system. And even though he's never talked about it, I feel my grandfather was a part of the child. Back then, they didn't have a child welfare system because both my grandparents are Takawa First Nation people, and they treated red people really, really, really bad, just like they treated black people. But black people had a, if you can believe this, black people had it better. Red people, there's a certain segment of this population, meaning namely white people. They have tried to exterminate Native people. They had no use for them. Black people, they owned. They tried to put the red man into shackles. Didn't work. You can't put someone in shackles. The only reason why the shackles worked for us is because the first and second generation remembered that they had the trauma of being kidnapped and being placed in horrible conditions while being smuggled here as human cargo. So all that trauma of being chained up next to dead bodies, people writhing in their own fecal and their own bodily waste, 2 and 3 months at a time, sometimes 3 and 4 months. Those that survived that ordeal were then placed into shackles. These people knew they were not home. And the travesty and the trauma in being kidnapped, the women had it worse in being kidnapped and then being brought here. Well, you were pretty almost beat down. And it took the extraordinary to even raise a fight, and they were killed off pretty quick. Pretty quick. So after 1 or 2 generations, you start raising people, and slavery is all they know. They've never had freedom before. And after 3 generations, the smell of home becomes more and more distant. Because even though you still have people, you still have elders that grew up in Africa. You're surrounded by more and more people, whereas this life of trial and tribulation is all they know. So, as most humans do, you grow to adapt to it. If you there is, and it's pretty rudimentary, but in India, they raise young elephants about yay high, They put a chain around one of their legs to keep them from wandering into the forest. And they raised them like that to keep them from wandering. And that elephant, as he or she grows up bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, the same chain. Well, when the elephant gets some size, you would think, honey, they could break that chain easily and wander off into the forest, and nothing will happen to them, or to break it. And as many people know, because this is how you break horses, that that elephant, even as he or she's gotten bigger, that chain is still represents what it represented to that elephant when it was young. So in its mind, even though it's big enough to break that chain, it's not going to even try because it tried when it was young and it couldn't do it. So in India, a lot of times, especially with elephant herders, um, you have whole elephants. You just put a chain around them and a spike in the ground, and they stay there. Or you put something around a lot and you tie it to a tree, to a palm tree. A, what's it called? A bit. If they have their own bridles, special bridles that go around their mouth, especially if you're on their back, and they don't move. Even though we know conceptually, we know that that elephant is strong enough to tear the whole tree out of its roots. But they don't know that because they've adapted to that from early on. So you still have a lot of people, a lot of ignorant people that say, well, blacks must have liked slavery, that they should have got out of it. And to many of those ignorant people, I always tell them, you know nothing about the human condition, how human beings can easily be conditioned, especially when they're young children. Many of those people are too stupid to consider that. They're just idiot. They're mostly idiots, and they're too stupid to consider anything like that. How human beings are conditioned from a young age to accept such a horrible way of life. But you started at a young age. So that being said, this is what makes hoodoo so exceptional and so extraordinary. Because there's spiritually talented people in every demographic, even in slavery. You have people that have spiritual gifts. And those spiritual gifts, you being a psychic, having ESP, extrasensory perception, clairvoyance, clairaudience, telekinesis sometimes, types of mediumship. Those gifts don't stop just because somebody owns you. Also, too, the sense of perception concerning oneself, the audacity of owning oneself, the sense of pride and dignity. Yes, systems like that are meant to tear that down, but it doesn't stop it completely, especially with certain people whose spiritual epigenetics, they're inside of them, there's a pride that's there. One thing that is extremely difficult is breaking the human spirit. It's extremely difficult, very, very difficult. And that's one thing that you really, really honestly cannot do. So I say all that to say that's what hoodoo is so extraordinary. Because even in trials and tribulations like that, when you had so much piled onto human beings in such horrendous environments, you still had many individuals that time doesn't talk about that were exceptionally powerful, and their owners knew it and respected them for it. And I have two or three grandfathers of one of those individuals, and several grandmothers. They were owned, but they were respected. Hey, I was talking. Hey, what's going on? How are you doing, honey? Oh, you can't hear me on Discord. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Well, how you doing? But anyway, well let me finish. Yeah, yeah. Let me finish this real quick. So that is the reason why hoodoo is so exceptionally important because it is a spiritual practice by us and for us. But hoodoo started under exceedingly difficult. And so you have certain brothers and sisters. Well, I don't want to worship anything, don't want to be a part of anything that deals with slavery. I get that. I absolutely get it. But they don't understand they don't understand the whole dichotomy, the whole systems that were created to break people, but didn't. And hoodoo conjure is one of the reasons why it didn't break us. Not many of us. Well, it broke quite a few, but it didn't break us because we always knew we were spiritually talented people to begin with. And we're not the only ones. And we'll talk about different, later on, we'll talk about how harsh systems of like that can actually create whole environments where extrasensory perception is not only it's not only is extraordinary, but it's a way of life. For instance, if you're in bondage and you're in fear of your life, and you have people that are over you every day, let's say you have a slave driver or overseer who is incredibly brutal and will whip you for the slightest infraction, over time you're going to develop a type of ESP to know when that person is around, even if you don't see them. Your spiritual senses are going to heighten to know when that person is around. And you're going to be able to read his mood to know psychically if he's in a good mood. I don't know if you can call that a psychic sense. Eventually, you develop these six senses in order to survive, in order to be comfortable. And epigenetic wise, so epigenetics basically is memory as well as spirit blood. You pass these gifts down to your children. And from generation to generation, that just gets stronger and stronger, more organic, till you have a whole huge demographic of Black people that are just exceedingly spiritually talented and spiritually gifted and don't even know why. Our spiritual gifts come from an act of survival. And those spiritual gifts were implanted and utilized in hoodoo, conjure, and root work. But in hoodoo, conjure, root work, we never forgot Africa. We were just on a different land, and we knew to look around us and our Native American brothers and sisters, or our indigenous brothers and sisters, many times in many different tribes. They helped us thrive because their enemy was our enemy as well. So many times when we would get away or didn't want to be around, when we would escape up north, many times before the movement, before the abolitionist movement, there were many native tribes that would help us up north. Just as, and now mind you, you have a lot of Black folks that feel they learned that there were native tribes that had slaves. Yes, there were. There were not many. Let me tell you why. Slaveries were very, very expensive, and it was a white man's game. The Cherokee had slaves. There were at least five First Nations that had slaves, absolutely. But these were more indentured servants and if they were slaves, but you can't rationalize and make it better. These people could work their way up into the system, into the tribehood. So it's more sort of a serfdom or indentured servitude. They were never the slaves concerned white men, where you could not work your way up anywhere. A slave was a slave. There's no way you could work your way up. Absolutely not. You couldn't work your way up. And our skin color kept us from working our way up. There was no way you could. A slave was always a slave. And your children will be born slaves. But anyway, getting off of that. But I had to discuss that to discuss hoodoo and conjure and why I'm on here every night, spouting and talking about as the gifts that it is, because it's a gift. So many of us have to change our attitudes first and foremost about our ancestors that were enslaved. Accept the truth, they were enslaved. But many of us have to understand what that means and the fortitude it took to live in an environment like that. But then also rediscover their strengths, their powers, the dignity and determination, integrity, as well as the humanity that it took to exceed and create something like hoodoo, conjure, and root work, even though you were in an environment meant to crush you. Our ancestors were exceedingly powerful and very, 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 very incredibly formidable. And they had to be. And hoodoo, root work, and conjure shows how powerful they were and shows how deeply they wanted to strive for a better life for their children, if not for themselves, for their children. Absolutely. Hey, hon, what's going on? How are you doing? Oh, she left. Exactly. She completely left. That's what sometimes happens. People, chaos will come in, and yeah, she left. And about that is just weird. She absolutely left. So she couldn't stand around until I finished my soliloquy because I was talking. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But there we go. Yeah, exactly. Chaotic behind. Oh, anyway, so there we go. Hmm. Hmm. So that's what hoodoo is. So I like to be on here to spout on to talk about every day and to expel the virtues of hoodoo and conjure and why it's so incredibly important every day. Because and impress that upon new people because that's how it was impressed upon me. The same thing I'm telling you is the same thing that was told to me. Um, because you have a lot of people nowadays, especially with the younger generation. And I get it. They don't want to know anything about slavery. Especially nowadays when there's such an uptick in racism and bigotry towards our people and from other people of color. We don't want to know about the harshness of the harsh. We're so busy trying to keep our head above water and to get away from that. And I get that. But hoodoo and conjure and root work teaches us that we come from strong stock, that we come from incredibly strong people. People that even when the odds of the greatest odds, and even greater odds than that, were stacked against us, we simply said, whatever. I'm still going to do what the hell I want to do. I need some water. Absolutely. Got a jug water over here. I usually pour my water in this jug here because it has my symbols on it. There we go. Hopefully that girl comes back because we had a good time that night. It's really had a lot of fun. But people don't necessarily value. They value you depending on what you can give them. There we go. And that's the unfortunate part about people. Unfortunately, these conjure symbols on the water. These are actually ghosts. They're symbols to detoxify. They're old alchemy symbols. European alchemy, something my grandfather taught me. There's another thing about hoodoo and conjure too. Get these symbols. I should actually take the paper off. But One thing about hoodoo is that we'll take from other spiritual practices and actually harness it and make it our own in a really, really cool way. Really, really cool way. We'll do that. There we go. I have three of my granddaddies. We'll talk about one. I keep getting his name mixed up. I feel it was Granddaddy Smith. He was from my mother's side of the family. It was said that of course, he worked on what is that man's last name? Well, Smith Plantation. But it was Smith. It was Smith hyphen something else. I think Harris. And it was said that he was such a talented conjurer that when he got older, he could make it rain. He could actually change the weather. There's a story goes, and one version of story. It was cotton season, but planting cotton, you have to rotate. You have to rotate the land because cotton is such a nutrient. It's such a nutrient robbing crop. If you plant cotton more than 2 or 3 seasons on your land will be stripped of any nutrients. So, anyone if you know anything about agriculture, after that second or third year, you know what? I could take some time out. I'm doing these little mojo things here. They're really, really cool. And I'm making some for like Sister Otter and everybody. Now, if you know anything about conjure, or cotton, you know that eventually you can't keep cotton planted on the same ground for more than 3 years. If you do that land that you plant that cotton's planted on, it won't thrive. Cotton crop thrives. Each successive year, the yield gets worse and worse. To that third year, that the plants themselves are weak. They're not yielding as much cotton fiber. Cotton weevils are there, and weak crops have a tendency, and it has a tendency to attract vermin, all types of vermin, big time. And so you have to be careful about that too as well. Definitely. What is that? Absolutely. So you're taught in agriculture when you have crops that are invasive, nutrient invasive to the dirt, the soil. You have to rotate crops. We're going to choose crops that are going to be able to replenish those minerals. First, crops that do not mind growing in mineral depleted soil. And you plant them, they grow well in that type of soil, and they replace those minerals back in. So alfalfa, corn, sometimes even taking those crops. I think alfalfa, what other crop grew really, really well? I know alfalfa did. Alfalfa, because alfalfa even though alfalfa grows really, really well in it grows really, really well in nutrient-rich dirt. Alfalfa can grow really well in soil that's not so nutrient-rich. It really can. I think. I think alfalfa was a rotated crop. Indigo was a rotated crop. I think sugarcane was a rotated crop too. But sugarcane has to have a certain environment. And cotton grows in an environment. Sugarcane needs wetness. The dirt needs to be wet, needs moistness. Cotton doesn't do too well in environments that are too humid. Not at all. So I think, and tobacco could be a crop, definitely. But tobacco was so because the crop itself was so incredibly sought over. Tobacco was sought over before oil was. Think of the 17th, 17th, 18th century in America. That was our oil, tobacco. Oh, yeah. So that tobacco crop, because of the fact that it's so lucrative and it's making key families a lot of money, not everybody had the pleasure of seeding tobacco. Not a lot of it, because who's gonna buy from you? I've always known that tobacco was so um, oh, what is that word? It was so not penalized, but the curing of the tobacco, the growing of the tobacco, it was such a closed industry, especially from Black people and from other desirables, other immigrants that were not considered desirable people, to the point whereas it, if you grew tobacco, they had whole entire men. All they did was that they bought tobacco crops. They controlled the market. They controlled its inflation. They controlled all of it. And if you wasn't the right skin hue, coming from the right family with the right connections, who the hell would buy from you? Now, there were, because tobacco was so lucrative, you still made good money, but you didn't make that type of money. Because I know in the deep South there were ways around it, because everybody was trying to compete with the tobacco, with Virginia tobacco, and I mean everybody. Everybody was trying to compete with Virginia concerning tobacco. Because back then, Virginia had it cornered. Virginia, certain parts of the Carolinas. What else? Even certain parts of Kentucky too. Oh yeah, definitely. Yes, absolutely. Hmm. But so cotton wasn't always cotton, for all of its evils. It's a very delicate crop. So you had to rotate it after the third year. Slaves, slaves are still they still got to pick that tobacco. They still got to pick the alfalfa, whatever crops out there. They still got to pick it, and they got to know how to pick it efficiently. How to get as much of a yield out of every day, so that you keep up time schedules. Because that crop got to be picked, sorted, and transported in a timely fashion. Because if not, it would rot, dry rot, wet rot, or it would be ruined. We forget the South is also rainy, and most of this work is done during the summer seasons, during the early spring, well, late summer, when things have grown, going into early autumn. Late summer, midsummer, late summer, going into autumn. By the time of autumn or late summer, everything should be done. Definitely, at least most crops. Yeah, late summer, going from August, September. Everything should be done. Now, the gentleman, Mr. Smith, I'm going to bring up, which was I think my fourth, fifth, or sixth great grandfather. He was said to be a conjurer that was so he was said to be able to make the weather change. Said to be so incredibly powerful and so incredibly pivotal, to where it had so much respect from everybody, even the people that even the man that owned him. To when he was an elder, he was said in one of the slaves with his shack that was his home and his family. It said over 25 people lived in a space that really should hold maybe six people. And on that porch, the white slave owner would pit down every Friday good raw materials. This was unheard of for a black slave, for a slave period. 2 pounds of flour, white flour. Black folks didn't get white flour. We got what's called buckwheat flour, milled flour, dark brown flour, buckwheat flour. We never got white flour. That was just for white folks. No, no, 2 pound, yeah, 2 pounds, a pound of white flour, 2 pounds of buckwheat, Salt, bacon, hmm, pounded bacon, which was smoked bacon, smoked cured bacon, which is completely unheard of. Cornmeal, can of lard. What was his other rations? A bag of rice. No, bag of hominy. They didn't have rice. They had rice, but it wasn't. No, it was too expensive. A bag of hominy, which is grits. And I believe that was it. That was absolutely it. Now, he would have that pit before him as he sat inside his rocking chair. This was payment to him for all the spiritual services he did for his master. And mind you, his master would lease him out, his property, would lease him out to other people that needed spiritual services, other white people. It was said Elder Smith was uncanny at how powerful he was. Oh, and then brown sugar. We never really wanted white sugar anyway, because if you would have gave him white sugar, Elder Smith probably wouldn't have received it. We consider white sugar very unlucky. It looked unnatural to us. He wouldn't have received it anyway. I'm missing other things too as well, but I know those. I got salt, pepper, of course. Pepper was always sold in the little bitty round bin little things. So a black pepper too. Probably a few other things too as well. I just can't think of them. But he would set these raw materials at his feet and in payment for his spiritual services. Elder Smith is not the only ex-slave, the only slave, because he was a slave, that I heard about that. This was unheard of for a slave master to think so highly of his slave, to relay these things at his feet as an elder. Because remember, this man can't work for him anymore, but he is working, doing work. He's an old man. I heard that all this was happening when he was in his 70s, so he couldn't be in the field anymore. All these raw ingredients were not just for his family, but for other black families too that live next to him and live around him. So in a way, this elder afforded a certain type of dignity and good food for those that were not just his family, but basically for everybody. Because he was going to share all of that with everyone that's a part of the community, part of the slave community, part of plantation politics. He was going to share that with everybody. So, this video is not going to be too long. It's just like 30 minutes. But I had to expound why I'm so passionate about hoodoo and conjure. Because I can feel the strength, I can feel the power in it, feel the strength in it. I know this. I've been told this. I understand this. And now you do too. So whenever you feel down and out, it's difficult to want to go back in time. Don't worry about that. Slavery is the semantics. You worried about the power that these people have. And you were saying to yourself, what power did they have if somebody owned them? That's all that they knew. And even then, hundreds and thousands. See, they don't tell y'all in y'all history books. Hundreds and thousands escaped. What if Canada's so full of black people? And many of them are not from the Caribbean. They're from here. They traveled up there, millions of them. Why do you think there's so many black people in Mexico? They're not from here. They're from here. Millions of them. They didn't just travel up north, they traveled down south of the border too as well. That's one of the first wars that the Mexicans had with, that was called the Spanish, or not Spanish War, the Mexican War, Mexican War. Finally, till at the Alamo. Part of the reason why the Alamo was being fought was what? Because white people were encroaching on land that did not belong to them. Now, in their stories, they're going to say that it did belong to them. That's why they won. It didn't. Did not. But another part of the reason why Santa Anna was so incredibly, was so geared up into fighting. Santa Anna, his great grandfather was a Negro, a black man. Mexico would not return the slaves that were fugitive. Once that slave reached Mexico, once he reached inside the borders of Mexico, the Mexicans said, "We're not returning them." And the white man didn't like that and thought that he could then fight them. Hoodoo is just a small example of how powerful we were, even when millions of people, a whole country, thought we were nothing. Hoodoo is our divine dignity, and how incredibly powerful it is. So please keep that in mind when you're speaking about hoodoo, learning about hoodoo. Keep that in mind. You're tapping into something that is vastly powerful, but that is pure history, proof of our dignity, proof of our power, proof of our fortitude. Even though we had yokes around our neck and chains around our feet and hands, we were still pretty powerful, way more powerful than the people that owned us. And they showed some of them, not all of them, some of them showed respect for that power. Yeah. All right, everybody, listen, be good. Please take care of yourself. It is 1:22, Sunday, July 5th, and I'm tired. But listen, be good. I'm going to try to get to bed a little bit. It's still late. But y'all, love you. Thank you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.